Hello everybody, welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson Teaches Capitalism and Socialism Context, part of my revision video series running through elements of an inspector calls. Some I have videos on the characters, and some like this one are looking at sort of the context, the wider aspects of the play that you need to know as you go into your exams. A quick reminder that this is part of your GCSE English Literature. You'll find it on paper 2, section A. So paper 2 being the second lit paper that you do, and it's at the very beginning of that one, section A, before you do section B, which is your poetry, and section C, your unseen poetry. Please be ready to pause this video, and it's so important that you've got pen and paper there and that you are actively making notes, because watching this video might help you a bit, but you're likely to forget those things. Writing them down means you've got something to look back at and revise from, and it's in your own words as well. So let's move on then and have a look. A reminder that this is part of AO3 context. That's Assessment Objective 3. You are assessed in different ways, and those skills are broken down into those AOs. And context is basically checking your understanding of where did this play come from, what was going on that caused it to be created and helped create it. But also, as I've put on my second bullet point there, make sure anytime that you're talking about the context that you are trying to link it to the play directly. So there's no point just writing a history and a recap of what capitalism is. It's about linking that to the ideas in the play and what it's showing, and also the exam question you've been asked. It's very unlikely that you'll be asked a question directly about either capitalism or socialism. It'll be therefore up to you to try and build those ideas into what you're writing about and make them relevant. They may not be relevant, so don't always be prepared that you have to talk about capitalism and socialism. However, they are really key themes that sort of underlie the play. So moving on. I want to talk to you firstly, about social inequality. Social meaning society, inequality meaning unequal, when things aren't balanced. So society in 1912, but also 1945 when the play was written, and 1912 being when it was set, society was not an equal one. This was where there was a real divide between those who had wealth and those who did not. And that's sort of how we divide them into classes. So your upper class, people with money, and your working class, people who had jobs but didn't really have a huge amount of income, almost living day to day. They had just enough money to live and not any sort of extra money. And there was a real divide in these classes, as I put there, but also a real divide in where these people lived. So like the size of houses, where these houses would be, how they lived as well, like how they're dressed in that photo in the top right. The boys on the left, who you presume are educated, probably going off to their private school. The boys on the right, who are probably in jobs already and are dressed very differently as well, had very different forms of education. While both of those sets of boys would have been in education, one would have been a paid for high quality education, and one would have been education provided for by the state, which is the country. The different rights of those people, and at the bottom that really sort of captures that as well. You've got the suffragettes there, the women sort of fighting for the right to be able to vote and have an equal be equal to the men. And I want to just make the final point at the bottom there, that a small percentage of the population had control over an enormous percentage of the wealth. So you're talking about, and I'm sort of, don't quote me on these figures, but maybe sort of 95% of the wealth and the money in the country was controlled by maybe sort of just 5-10% of the population. So it was those, if you had money, you generally really had money, and if you weren't one of those people, you generally were sort of really working hard to get a small amount of money. So just picture that now. That's sort of the backdrop to this. And then we need to talk about the ideas of capitalism and socialism. So the word capitalism comes from capital, which is another word for money. And my two pictures there trying to capture it and sort of make it stick in your head. The top hat, one that was generally worn as sort of a very showy off hat, sort of indicating wealth, and the pile of coins there again indicating wealth. And here we go. Capitalism then was a system for running the economy, sort of a belief in the way that the economy and the country therefore could be run. And the basic idea, and I really am simplifying this to try and keep it simple, give business freedom to compete with itself, to compete with other people, to make its own decisions, and it will create profit. And creating profit is good for the country, because then when there is tax, the richer the company, the more tax, and that goes back to the country. But also creating more money means there's this trickle down effect I've put at the bottom there, and that means that other people will become business. So to trickle down is to run down. So the people at the top running the company, if they're rich and doing well, their employees will be richer and doing well, but never as well as those who are actually running the companies. But it was a belief that allow the country to be in competition, and then more money will be created, more wealth will be created, and that's good for the country. So that was a belief. Now, socialism is by no means the opposite, and it isn't like there are these two systems and nothing else. Systems are complicated, but within the play we need to sort of focus on the difference between capitalism and then socialism. So what's socialism? Social is the word which links to the idea of society, like a group of people. And it's a system that's based on social democracy and justice. So almost like fairness across for everybody, almost giving equality to everybody is how I would maybe simplify it. And this is really simplified. Like community ownership and support for all people in society. And if you want to make it simpler, ideas for sort of socialism include the idea of a welfare state, the idea of giving benefits for those who are most in need, for those who are disabled, for those who are like extremely poor, maybe who are homeless, and actually been able to support them to get into work, to get into jobs. And at the bottom there, it's about the idea of those who can afford to pay more, take more of the burden. So if you have more money, then you might pay higher taxes because you're able to, and you're therefore able to support those who aren't able to pay taxes because they don't have that money. That's a really simplified version of capitalism and socialism, but they are themes which run through the play, and we'll talk more about Priestley in a minute. But focusing then on how this actually links to the play, I put there capitalism was generally supported by the upper classes. That would make sense because they had more to gain from capitalism. The upper classes generally were business owners or people with money, and capitalism allowed them to make more money. It gave them the freedom to make money. Whereas socialism is often supported by the working classes because they had the most to gain from that, because they would receive the benefits, they would be supported more. Now, linking it to characters, on the left there with capitalism, it's very much, a nice word I use is embodied by, sort of, he represents, Mr. Burling does, capitalism, whereas socialism much more by the inspector, who is standing up for the rights of characters like Eva Smith, who is dead in the play and therefore has no voice. That's why the inspector and Eva Smith are pictured there. She almost embodies socialism, but it's the inspector who actually has the voice in the play and stands up for the characters like Eva Smith. Now, I'm going to not talk through all of these. I'm trying to keep this video brief, but it's definitely worth pausing these slides. The A1 in brackets or the A3 in brackets says like Act 1 or Act 3, just giving you an idea of where you can find these quotes. But the quotes on the left then come from Mr. Burling, and they really sort of talk about the idea of money and the importance of money and how you're meant to work hard and make your own way. And they're very capitalist quotes. So if you're ever looking for evidence of where capitalism can be seen, those quotes certainly have that. Like the freedom on the last quote from Mr. Burling, like sort of how the inspector shouldn't have any concern in how he runs his business. Whereas on the right there, what you can see are quotes which maybe sort of really represent socialism. Again, all coming from the inspector. The middle one sort of trying to really build up sympathy because he's talking about Eva Smith there. And at the bottom, that quote is quite a famous one, a really good one for you to learn. Comes from the inspector, and he's talking about almost how society needs to act and needs to change. So pause that, look at those, maybe write those down, but decide which ones you think are really the important ones that you can try and remember. And then I've sort of tried to boil it down into how the capitalists are portrayed in the play and how socialists and socialism is portrayed in the play. So on the left-hand side there, like it's really selfish, greedy, only interested in money, but also irresponsible and a lack of taking responsibility, responsibility being one of the key themes of the play. Whereas on the right there, we've got the idea of wanting to help others and sort of putting other people first and sort of being responsible. Whereas I've put at the bottom bullet point for each one, Left hand side misguided because of the predictions that Mr. Burling makes about the future, which are wrong predictions, and the audience would have known that, making his capitalist views also seem misguided. And on the right hand side there, the inspector in his final speech makes predictions about the future, or certainly talks about the future, and those predictions again appear to be true, making his ideas seem more informed and therefore correct. And both of those are examples of dramatic irony. Look that up as a method because it comes up twice in the play. J.B. Priestley's views are really important to understand there as well. He was a supporter of the idea of democratic socialism, and therefore the way he portrays socialism and the ideas of socialism through the inspector are really favourable. He's really positive about it, and therefore you could almost argue that he was a socialist, very much so. These are slides which I've used on a different video as well, so I'm just not going to go through all of these details, but why he wrote an Inspector Calls is because, if I'm being really simple, you can pause this slide and read that. He wanted society to change. Society was stuck in a position where things needed to change. They'd gone through 2 world wars, and quite clearly things weren't working. They kept leading to fighting and kept leading to inequality, and therefore he saw the idea of society needing to change being really important. And this quote, which I'm going to allow you to read to yourself, basically captures that. For the higher marks, you might be able to talk about this and just mention that during a BBC radio broadcast, J.B. Priestley made comments. And if I was to summarise what you're about to read there and pause to read there, that is basically him talking about how we need to move society from being one about ownership and money and power in actually sort of to moving towards supporting other people in society and working as a community. And that's got to be a key word from that quote near the bottom there, community. So these are some quick recap questions just to check your understanding of the play. Have a look at those, have a go at answering them, and if you can't answer them, double back and look through this and watch this video again to make sure that you can, please. And finally, just wanted to move on and talk to you about after the play, just to make you understand it a bit really. So in 1945, that's the year that the Second World War ended, there was a general election in this country where people went to vote for who they wanted to run their government. Winston Churchill was Conservative, and I believe it's Clement Attlee on the left there was a Labour Party leader, and the Labour Party won. So despite Churchill leading us through the war successfully, it shows that the country was actually ready for a change. It almost seems unbelievable that the man who led through the Second World War and helped us win the war was then actually sort of lost the election. And that led then to, the Labour government led to the setting up of the welfare state and also the NHS on the right there. So the NHS, the National Health Service, which was free healthcare for everybody in the country, no matter who you were, and it was paid for by taxes, but also the welfare state was set up. Now this wasn't literally in 1945, but this was set up in the few years after the Labour Party won, and you suddenly saw benefits, which was supporting and encouraging families to have children. Each child you had, you would receive a certain amount of money to help you support that child. But also if you were homeless, if you had disability, you would also receive support from the government. The local authorities were then, so that's like your local areas, like maybe Cornwall, Devon, London, Birmingham, they were responsible for the people in their area, the old people who weren't helped by anyone else. And then you started to see sort of what you might call nursing homes now set up, but sort of support for people. It was a real change in our country, and that's socialism and capitalism sort of in action for you. So I hope this video has helped explain it a little bit for you. By all means, go off and look up other examples of it and use BBC Bitesize to try and help you. I hope this video has been of use, as I say. Do check out the other videos on my channel, which might help you with other elements of the play and also all other elements of English. And above all, good luck when it comes to your GCSE exams. Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end, and goodbye.